Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Forward with Forli Friday podcast. Thanks for joining me on a fantastic Friday. Today, we are going to be discussing how to find a guide dog school that is right for you. Now, this is a bit of a tricky one, but the first piece of advice that I'm going to give you is think of this as any other consumer service. So whether you're trying to decide what kind of computer to purchase, what cell phone carrier to go with, what apartment to rent, what airline to fly, what restaurant to go to, in the end of the day, choosing a guide dog school is similar to any other type of consumer product or service. So think about it in terms of picking the best service for your needs. And I think that'll help a bit, is viewing it as this. If you've gone to college or university or a technical school or any other type of training program, it's kind of like picking a university in some ways or another type of training program. So that brings me to my second piece of advice. Personal testimony is a big one. Now, of course, personal testimony is also very subjective, so it is important that you understand the value of personal testimony, but also take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. If you walk into a room and ask 5 guide dog handlers who have dogs from 5 different schools, which school is the best school, they're all going to give you 5 different answers. So everybody has their own opinion on what worked for them, what they liked, what they didn't like. But it's definitely important to talk to people that you know. If you know people who have guide dogs, talk to them about their experience at whatever school they went to. That will help you in developing a little bit of a rapport. You'll have a personal connection there. And then, get on Google and start looking at the guide dog schools. Go to their websites, learn about them. Most schools are divided up into an About Us, admissions, client services, training, and follow-up sections. There's others as well, but those are kind of the main ones that you'll most likely see on their website. Of course, the About Us is going to be talking about the school, probably give a history, maybe talk about the board. Perhaps they have staff bios, or the CEO bio is probably there. It's all good stuff to read if it doesn't weigh you down too much, especially the history part, because that'll kind of tell you where the school came from and how they've evolved. If they've pioneered any training tactics, they might put that information there. And then admissions, client services, and training may or may not be all under one heading. But admissions will be talking about the guide dog application, how to apply to the school, directions for doing so. There might even be a contact there. Client services will be talking about you as a client, so what it'll be like in class, the in-class experience, or if there's lecture materials provided, they might be located there. And then follow-up, that's the service you receive after you get a guide dog. So usually there's a description of what kinds of services the school provides, whether that's veterinary financial assistance, whether that's telephonic support, in-person support, etc. So really take your time, go through these sections, really try to learn as much as you can about the about the school through their website, and kind of start putting together a list of things that resonate with you. Most schools are going to talk about their training philosophy. They're going to explain how their guide dogs are trained. They're going to talk about how long you're going to be spending, which is a good segue. So there's 2 types of guide dog schools out there. There is the residential on-campus training school, and then there is a in-home training school, and then there's a a third option that's sort of a hybrid of the two. Some schools offer in-home training as an option. Usually it has to be a pretty specific option. For example, if you're a single parent and can't leave your children to train with a guide dog, school would make an exception and bring a dog to you. Now, there are, of course, advantages and disadvantages of both types of training. Of course, an in-home training environment means that the instructor comes with your new guide dog to you and your new dog get to learn from the instructor in your home environment, which is very nice. The downside to that is you do have to plan a little bit more. If there's a certain route or a certain type of environment that you want your dog to be exposed to, you're the local, you're the one that lives there. So the instructor can certainly help, but it helps them a lot more if you can come up with some personalized routes of your own. And then, of course, if something happens, if for whatever reason the dog isn't an appropriate match, there's no training kennel, and so the dog would have, and the instructor would have to go back, and the instructor would have to get another dog and come back and work with you. But again, I'm not going to go into all the advantages and disadvantages, but just to kind of give you some highlights. So for a residential training school, this is where you would come to the school's location, and you live in a residential type environment, and you spend between 2 and 4 weeks training with your new guide dog in a controlled environment. Now, the advantage of this is the school has the routes pre-planned. If you want to expose your dog, say, to hiking or a dense urban environment, there's routes for that. If you want to learn how to put your dog underneath an airplane seat, a guide dog school could probably make that happen. Some schools even have a mock-up of like an airplane seats, a couple of rows, so you know what it's like to get your dog underneath the seat when you're flying with them. The disadvantage, of course, is that you sort of have to put your life on hold for the amount of time that you're in class. You have to travel to their location, and you're spending time away from home in class. And a little insider tip, I don't recommend you try and take your work or school studies with you while you go to a residential style training program. Typically the training days are pretty long. You're learning a lot of stuff, especially as a new first-time handler, and it's really not ideal to try to be, working on projects or answering email or keeping up. It's just really hard to do that. Now, maybe you have to. That's just the way things go. That's fine. There is some downtime, but try to plan for that if you're going to go. So those are the two different types of schools, and it's good to figure out which type might fit your needs. Typically, a residential style training program, it's going to be a quicker time, a shorter amount of time it'll take from application to class, as opposed to an in-home training. And that has to do with in-home training is a bit more resource intensive. You have one guide dog instructor bringing one dog to one client in an area, and they probably are only working with one person at a time, and they spend between 10 and 14 days with you. So it does take a bit longer. I've heard of people being on wait lists for 2 years to get a dog for in-home training. But if that's what you need, then perhaps it's worth it to you to wait that long. When you're looking at schools and you're trying to figure out which ones are quote-unquote legit or not, understand that guide dog schools are here to serve you and to serve the greater good. Now, to sort of help you decide whether a school might be a good fit or quote-unquote legitimate, you can look for a couple of things, a couple of different certifications. One is called the International Guide Dog Federation, IGDF certification. This is a trade association, essentially, and it's a member-based organization. It's international. They're based in the UK, and they're an accreditation program. So similar to what schools and universities have to go through, the IGDF ensures that the member guide dog schools are adhering to specific standards and practices, and so that is kind of an organized way to determine which schools are following that. It's very highly regarded as an organization, the IGDF, that is. So if you do see a guide dog school with that designation, that's fantastic. That's a good, really, really good sign. Now, if a guide dog school doesn't have that designation, it's not the end of the world. It doesn't mean they're a terrible organization. It just means they don't belong to that, and they're choosing to go a different way, and that's purely an organizational strategy move, or maybe they just aren't able to do it due to resources or other constraints. The other designation you can look for is the Assistance Dogs International. Again, somewhat similar to IGEF. It's a program member-based, and it's designed for assistance dog organizations. So those are good things to look for. And once you've kind of gone through and seen a few of the schools, or maybe you look at all of them, there's 12 in the United States, give or take. There's roughly 90 schools throughout the world. Once you kind of figure out the ones that are interesting to you, pick up the phone and give them a call. Typically there's somebody in admissions or client services, maybe there's public relations or a community outreach department who can answer your questions. Maybe you talk to somebody in the training department. Really just depends on the school's organizational structure. But just ask them about their program. Now if you go in and you say, hey, I'm looking at schools A, B, and C, and your school D, which one should I pick? That's kind of an unfair question. Of course, there's a little bit of bias, but more importantly, nobody's going to tell you what to do. No one's going to tell you which school you should go to. That's really up to you. So maximize the efficiency of your conversation and ask them things about their training program. How long is it? What do I have to do? What kind of follow-up do you provide? What kind of dogs do you use? What's your training philosophy? Do you use positive reinforcement? Do you use compulsory training? All of those things and more that I'm sure questions that you will generate as you're looking through this, you want to ask. That will help you a lot. Now, proximity. Should you go to a school that's, say, if you live on the West Coast, that's on the West Coast? Not necessarily. If you live on the West Coast and you want to go to a school in New York, and that school has what you're looking for, it's worth going to New York for. Many schools will provide transportation, especially if they're residential school. You'll have a place to stay, as well as room and board. But not all of them, so you want to make sure and ask that question, who's responsible for that, how does all that work? But I think it's important that you find the school that's the best fit for you. So just because there's a school maybe nearby, it may or may not be a good fit. Maybe it is a good fit. Or maybe you think, well, I live here on the West Coast, so I have to just go to a school on the West Coast. Well, maybe not. Find the school that's right for you, because that's going to be really important. You're going to have this dog for potentially 10 years, and you want to make sure that you're doing everything you can to make it as successful for you as possible. So find the school that works for you. If you can get to a guide dog school, if there is a school near where you live, or even a couple hours drive or something, or maybe you're traveling somewhere and you're like, hey, I read about this school, I'd really like to check them out. Give them a call in advance and ask for a tour. Say you're stopping by, you're a potential client, you'd like to see the school, could you give me a tour? Most schools will be happy to accommodate that request. And that's a fantastic way for you to get a hands-on experience, to see a school in action, and to really give you a thorough understanding of the particular school. Now, do you need to launch a multi-city national tour to go and see of half a dozen schools or more? No, you don't necessarily have to do that. I and many other people have chosen schools without having seen them, but doing some thorough research. So I don't think it's necessary for you to go and find a school, or to go and look for schools and spend all this time and money and that sort of thing. Now, if that's the way you feel that will give you the best decision-making power, then go for it. If you have the means and the time and that's what you want to do, there's nothing wrong with that. Go check them out. That's great. You'll probably have a lot of insight when you're done, and could probably write a user guide. Another place that you can connect with schools is at conferences. So if you go to like major consumer groups in the United States, that would be the American Council of the Blind and the National Federation of the Blind. Both have national and state conferences. At the national conferences, you're going to find a larger variety of schools. Many schools send staff, whether they're guide dog instructors or admission staff, public relations staff, etc. It's a great way to talk to people. Hit up the exhibit hall. That's usually where you're going to find like an info table with somebody who can talk to you about the school. Or if that's not possible, just ask around. Say, hey, do you know of any guide dog instructors here? Ask the event organizers. They'll certainly know. If you can't make it to a national conference, if you go to a regional or state conference, oftentimes you will find guide dog instructors. There's also an event called Top Dog, which is a guide dog school-themed conference, and many of the larger schools will go and will be represented. Check that out. You can go online and check them out. I think it's biannually, if I'm not mistaken, but that sounds like a really good thing to go. If you have the time and the resources and you want to, talk to multiple schools, that's another way. So many different ways to check the schools out. Of course, social media, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, all those sorts of things, YouTube. Like them on the different social media platforms. See what they're saying every day. What are they talking about? Are they more donor centered? Are they more graduate centered? Are they more puppy raising centered? What are they talking about? What is their style? And again, that'll kind of give you a daily sort of dose of what kind of organization they are, because those social media channels, that's the official communication to social media. Other than the school's website, that's an official communication channel, and you want to check that out. Now, an alumni group or something like that, that's not official communication, but the school itself, most of them operate their own social media page. So another great place to check out schools and to see if it might be a good fit for you. So I really hope you liked this podcast. If you did, please click that like button. Feel free to share with your social media. If you have questions or comments, leave them in the comment section below. And thanks again for listening.